All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Wellness, Finding Reliable Health Information. Before we get started, as usual, just a couple of items to take care of. We will hopefully have some time for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can type those into the question box in the lower portion of your control panel. We will be posting a recording of the webinar online, but if you would like a copy of the presentation in PDF format, or if your question does not get answered today, please email our support inbox, which will be shown at the end as well. Okay, so here's what we're going to be covering today. Two main topics. I'm going to start with how to critically look at the information you see online to hopefully be sure that it's coming from a reliable source. Then I will touch on some of the claims that we see on food labels, and we'll give you some guidelines as far as to what those claims actually mean. Hopefully you'll get some valuable information and we'll be able to use it next time you hit the internet or the grocery store. So I'm going to start with that reliable online information. Sometimes it seems like this phrase might be kind of an oxymoron, but there is actually some reliable information out there, believe it or not. When it comes to health-specific information, it is just as hard as any other type of information to be sure that it's coming from a quality source. So I found a few tips on what to look for when you are looking up information specifically related to nutrition, exercise, stress, or sleep. I found a great resource that organizes the tips into the ABCs of evaluating online information. Just a great way to look at those sites that pop up when you're doing a search for whatever topic that you're interested in. The first A is authority. Who wrote the page or article? Can you find information on the author even? Most reliable pages will have an About Us or similar page where you can find some information and background of the authors of their articles or the research that has been done, or at least a link to that information. Next question, is there a specific group or company that sponsors the page? If so, what is their purpose? Is it simply to inform, or is it to sell or persuade you of something? We're going to get to that in a little more detail when we get to our first B, but moving on with this one, what type of website is it? Typically the .org or .org or the .edu sites are going to be the most reliable sites. .org is an organization, nonprofits are going to be .org. But again, just be careful of these because they can also be an advocacy group that's pushing a specific agenda or viewpoint. In this case, just be sure you're asking all the other questions that we'll be talking about today just to keep digging a little deeper. .edu is going to be your college or university, and it's more than likely going to be research-based and will have the author's information available. So that's really one of the best ones is the .edu. .gov is another one that's typically reliable. It's kind of in between the .edu and the .org. And again, just look at it closely as well to just be sure that specific studies are from non-biased sources, because unfortunately we can get that bias in a lot of different places. .com should be used with the most caution, as anyone can get a website and put anything they want on it, basically. So most reliable health articles will have their sources listed at the bottom as to where they got their information from. This is a great way to double check that the information that was given and the conclusions are also similar to multiple sources. Again, we're going to touch on that a little bit, but it's always important not to rely on one research article or one website to get all of your facts. The next A, whoops, sorry, went too fast there. The next A stands for accuracy. If you're reading an article on a new health-related product or device, look to see what type of article it is. Is it someone's opinion on their personal blog, or is it a research-based study that has links to sources like I talked about above? Some opinions absolutely turn out to be correct, but you just need to be wary of someone that is touting a specific food, a product, or some other lifestyle change without any research to back it up, other than maybe what they've done on their own. Also, are there multiple studies that come to the same conclusion? Sometimes with new topics, there may not be a whole lot of research out there yet, but the safest way to know that something is pretty accurate is to look at their sources to see if there are other people supporting it as well, other people finding the same results. And then ask yourself this question: is it too good to be true? We should all know that if it seems too good to be sure or to be true, unfortunately, it usually is. If an article says, hey, take this pill and you're going to lose 20 pounds in 2 days, yeah, I would love that to be true, but that's probably not going to be accurate or reliable just because of common sense stuff that we know. So put on that common sense hat when you are exploring or researching the health information. And again, if it seems too good to be true, usually it is going to be. So just keep that in mind. When it comes to the studies as well, the type of study is going to be important. What kind of study was done? A double-blind study is typically what we want to see, which means that neither the participants nor the experimenters know who the control is and which one is being changed. Some studies don't have those control groups to begin with, which are just the groups that don't have anything changed, because it's important that they have a benchmark to be studied against. So we want to have a control group ideally. We want to have that double-blind research done ideally. Again, it's not going to be possible in all situations, but if they don't do it, they should have a pretty valid reason of why they're not doing that type of study. Also, the sample size should be as large as possible. If you're going to study 10 people and for that on an entire population, those results probably aren't going to be too accurate. I mean, again, they could be, but we want a study of 1,000 people or 10,000 people instead. And while, again, that's not always possible, for our purposes today, when we're looking for health information on the internet, when it comes to finding the accurate information that we want to see, we just want to see those numbers as big as we can possibly get them. So again, just keep your eyes open for that type of stuff. All right, now I'll move on to the next site, or the next page. All right, on to the B's. I've only got one B here, which is bias. I touched on this already a little bit, but any company can sponsor a page or research article on any topic, and many of them do. You're going to see a lot of articles out there that are sponsored by the people that are selling it, right? It makes sense because they want research behind it. But they can also choose how they portray that information, and it makes sense that they will do it to make it as pro whatever topic, as pro them as they can. You do that too, right? Who wouldn't do it that way? If they want to sell you a product, they're going to absolutely do that. So if you're reading an article and you see that it's really one-sided and it's not really acknowledging any other viewpoints or sides of an argument, that site or article might be biased. Look at the tone of the writing to see if it's really negative to one side of something. Again, you need to look at the About Us information or the author to see who is actually paying for that article, paying for that website, or that study that was done. That should be somewhere on there. And again, you'll be surprised at some of those companies that will do that website to make it look unbiased, but it might still be a little biased. And again, check for that supporting evidence of their claims and check the sources to see if other places were used and other groups and organizations back up those claims. Third-party research or articles are always going to be the best way to get an unbiased opinion on something. This simply means that someone who is not affiliated or does not have a vested interest in the outcome of the study or a product comes in and either conducts the study themselves or provides feedback on a product. You see those websites a lot. There's third party, they're not affiliated with anybody. They're going to give you strong, unbiased opinions. Those are the very best places to look for stuff. Again, especially when it's coming with health information. All right, C's. First one is currency. When was the article written? Current information is key, especially in the health-related field where new information, new technology, new research is coming out all the time. Ideally, the study or article would be 3 years old or younger. Yes, there is definitely going to be exceptions to this, but in an ideal situation, you're going to find that information from current sources and current studies. The next C and the last one of the ABCs is going to be content. Simply looking at the quality of the website can tell you a lot. If it's hard to navigate or looks inappropriate for the type of content you are looking for, it's probably not going to be too reliable. Common sense one, but an important thing to look at is their spelling or grammatical errors. Are the sources and references easy to find? Like I said, simply looking at the site itself can tell you a lot about the reliability of the articles and the research and the information that you're finding. So hopefully you picked out a couple things to look at when you're trying to sift through the millions of sites out there. Again, not all of these things are going to be the whole picture, but be sure you're asking every question to dig deep to make sure the information you are getting is going to be as accurate as you possibly can find it. All right, so I wanted to take a little bit of a direction here and look at the health claims that are on labels. Now, I'm not talking about sugar content, things like that. I'm talking about when someone says light yogurt, all natural ingredients, reduced fat, that type of stuff. When companies are looking to sell their products, they're going to pull out all the stops and put anything they possibly can right on the front of that box or food or whatever it is to get our attention, especially now because we are more health conscious as a population as a whole, and we're looking for better options or what we think are going to be better options. Some of you may or may not know that there are specific rules when it comes to when companies can put certain labels on their foods, like the light, things like that. The FDA, or Food and Drug Administration, and the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, are the main groups that regulate what companies can put on food labels. I found some of the most common ones, and I'm going to go through to give you exactly what it means when you see foods that have those big, bold claims on them. First one on here is light. This kind of seems to be on everything, but here is what those foods actually have to abide by to have that on the label. So for foods that have 50% or more of their calories coming from fat, light means that they have reduced that fat by at least 50%. So they would have had at least to cut it in half. In foods that have less than 50% of their calories from fat, they have reduced the calories by 1/3 or the fat by at least 50%. If they're modifying the salt content, it has to have at least 50% less sodium than the reference food. Now, the reference food is simply the normal version. So if you have a light version, they're comparing it to the regular, full-fat, normal, regular yogurt. So I want to talk about light just for a minute. A lot of people will go for the light version of yogurt, salad dressings, those types of things. And according to this, you're getting less fat or calories. That's it. But what happens when they go for the light version and they take out the fat? They have to figure out a way to keep that flavor, right? So what are they going to add? Sugar is usually the answer to that question, or artificial sweeteners. And in certain foods, we don't need to get rid of the fat. I'm going to take yogurt for an example. It's healthy and a heck of a lot more healthy than adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. So before you automatically reach for the light version, take a look at the actual label, the nutrition part of it, and compare the sugar content and the ingredient list to see what they added in. Again, just knowledge is power, but don't automatically assume light is going to be the healthier version. All right, next, reduced or less are more terms that are pretty common on our foods. This simply means that they have taken out 25% of whatever nutrient they have said. So reduced sugar, reduced sodium, those types of things are probably the most common ones. This can be a positive. For example, I'm all about cutting down sugar in foods by 25%. But again, just look to see that they didn't replace it with something like an artificial sweetener or something like that. Sodium is usually not replaced by anything, but again, just keep your eyes open. Make sure you look at the label and the ingredient list. And same thing with reduced fat. I'm pretty confident that most of those foods will have more sugar to replace that fat, so just be mindful of those things. And again, fat might not be a bad fat. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But again, just be mindful of those things when you're making your choices. Fat-free and low-fat. Fat-free means it has an insignificant amount of fat, which is they consider 0.5 grams or less. Low-fat is 3 grams or less for the reference amount, which is usually, reference amount is like a serving size, for example. And again, just to reiterate, just because it's fat-free or low-fat doesn't mean it's healthy. I'm just giving you what the labels actually mean when they put that on there. And that's actually true with a lot of health claims, like, for example, gluten-free, which I haven't included to specifically talk about today, but I know it's out there and that some people think if they see gluten-free on the label, it means that it's healthier. Let's go on this quick tangent for a second. Gluten itself is not something that needs to be avoided unless you have celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Gluten is a protein found in things like wheat, rye, barley, those types of things. And now the reason people have success going gluten-free with weight loss in particular is that they're cutting out unnecessary carbohydrates typically, which that's what we're going to tell you all day long. Cut out unnecessary carbohydrates because that's going to be helpful in weight loss. It's going to be helpful cutting down your triglycerides and your blood sugar and all that good stuff. But it's not healthier just because it doesn't have the gluten in it. Let's just get that clear. Okay, off my tangent, back to the list. Next page. Ever wonder what it means when something says it's high in something or a good source of something? Fiber is a common example that I see. They can't just say that whenever. There is a benchmark that has to be hit before they can put that on the label. For this standard, a good source of a nutrient means that it has 10 to 19% of the recommended daily value of that nutrient. To be able to say it has a high amount of something, it has to be 20% or above of that daily value. Low calorie means no more than 40 calories per reference amount, which again, usually just that serving size. Calorie free, which technically I guess it's not calorie free, same thing with the no fat, just means it has less than 5 calories per reference amount or serving size. Again, remember that calorie free doesn't necessarily mean healthy, just giving you the terms here to let you know what that means when they put it on there. No added sugars. This just means that no sugar or sugar-containing ingredient is added during processing. So if there are naturally occurring sugars, they are not counted as added sugars. So fruits aren't considered added sugars in foods, which is fine. But this can be where we get into a little bit of trouble with things like juices. We see a big no added sugar on that orange juice, and we think, fantastic. Super healthy version. I'll get in my vitamin C without having to buy my oranges. Not so fast. Yes, not adding sugars to juices is great, but juice itself is still going to have a ton of sugar in it compared to the actual fruit. And when we take away the fleshy, usually fiber-filled parts of something like an orange to make the juice, all we have left is that sugar part. And yes, it's natural, but it's still way more than we need because it's all concentrated together from a bunch of oranges. If you would eat all of those oranges that are in one glass of juice, you're not going to be able to do that. That's going to fill you up, which is the point of fiber and the point of those other ingredients and I shouldn't say ingredients, the other parts of the oranges. So if you were to eat a whole orange instead of a glass of orange juice, you would get much less sugar and much more healthy fiber. So again, another thing to consider with added sugars, I'm going to mention this again, but the recommendation for added sugars is 25 grams a day for women and 37.5 grams per day for men. So again, added sugar is definitely something to look out for, but just because it doesn't have added sugar, just be aware of that specifically in those juices. Sugar alcohols are not included in the added sugars either. Those come from plant products and are just chemically altered sugars, basically is what it is. I'd say they're probably similar in line to artificial sweeteners. Some people have some digestive issues with sugar alcohol, so that's one big thing to keep in mind with that. Sorbitol, xylitol are a couple of common examples of sugar alcohols. Again, not inherently bad, but people can have some bad side effects with them. So just be on the lookout for that. Okay, on to some more that are maybe not quite so straightforward. Natural. You see it all the time, right? All natural, made from natural ingredients. What does that actually mean? Interestingly, there is not technically a formal definition by the FDA, but they do have a long-standing policy on it, which is written there. It says natural means that nothing artificial or synthetic, including all color additives, regardless of source, have been included or has been added to a food that would not normally be expected to be in that food. This does not include anything to do with food production methods or manufacturing methods, anything like that. Now, an interesting note here is that if you go onto the FDA website, they're actually asking for public information and comments on how this term is being used. They state that there have been 3 citizen petitions asking them to define the term or even prohibit the use of the term natural or all natural on products. And so the FDA is actually asking for public comment on whether it is appropriate to actually define natural, and if so, how they should define it. and how it should determine the appropriate use of the term on food labels. So this seems to be an ever-evolving status, so keep yourself up to date on the research to see how it ends up, because it is interesting. When you say natural, again, you're going to assume healthy, but you know there's different ways to get around that type of stuff too. All right, free range. This specifically has to do with poultry, so our chicken, our eggs, turkey, that type of thing. But it seems to be in a lot of articles I read, so I figured I'd just put some definitions up on here. Free range means that the producers have to demonstrate that the poultry have access to the outside. There are no regulations as far as how big that access has to be, or how big the outside space is, or whether it has to be grass, or how much time the animals have to be outdoors, or anything like that. So take that as you will. I would imagine that the outdoor spaces vary widely depending on the company. If you are curious, it's always good to do your research on the companies that you purchase specific products from, specifically your proteins and eggs and things like that, just to see if you can find any feedback or comments regarding how the animals are raised in their procedures. Pasture raised is another term that a lot of poultry users use. This is not regulated by any federal agency, but those that use it say that it means that the chickens are raised in the outdoors. So again, I urge you, do your research when it comes to this topic to make an informed decision when it comes to how certain companies raise their foods and produce their eggs specifically. Last term on this page, fresh poultry is considered to be poultry that has never been under 26 degrees Fahrenheit. So essentially never frozen long term. I just found that on the poultry. I would assume that there are similar regulations on other proteins and things like that when they have to say, or when they say fresh. Now, before I move on to the last part here, I just want to clarify some of these terms. We're not recommending any specific type of food that you're eating, whether it be free-range chicken, all-natural, grass-fed, that type of thing. The goal today is to simply inform you as to what the terms mean, as many people just don't know and they aren't clear. So again, no specific promotions. We're going to keep it non-biased today as much as I can, but with sugar, I'm not going to be non-biased. But we're going to keep it just strictly definitions, just so everyone is more knowledgeable on the subject. So speaking of other terms, let's talk about organic. Organic labels have a lot to them. It's a very intensive process to be able to put organic on your food. And I'm not going to have time to go into all the details today, but just to summarize, there are aspects including soil quality, animal raising practices, additives, and pest and weed control, which is usually what most people think of, but there's a lot more to that when you're talking about organic. So again, whether you choose to go organic or not, just know that that label means a lot more than you may have thought, and look into it yourself to see what they're doing with those types of foods. You may also see some foods that say made with organic ingredients. This means that at least 70% of the ingredients are produced using organic methods. So the rules above will still apply, but just not to the whole food or the meal, just at least, or just 70% of it. Next is non-GMO foods. GMO stands for genetically modified organism. A GMO is an organism created in a laboratory using genetic modification or engineering techniques. This has been a big buzzworthy topic, about as much as organic has been in the past few years. So here's the scoop on non-GMO. It just means there are no genetically modified organisms in the food. Yeah, I'm sure you figured that part out already. But right now, it's not regulated by federal law in the U.S. So there are no federal regulations that govern how the food is produced. Now, that doesn't mean that those non-GMO labels that you see aren't regulated by anyone. There is a nonprofit organization called the Non-GMO Project that was created to make a standard for those foods. Just a quick fact, though, if it's organic, it is always non-GMO. If it's non-GMO, it's not automatically organic. There's a lot more that goes into the organic than the non-GMO. So just be clear on that. Last one is grass-fed. We had questions on this one a decent amount, so I wanted to include it on here. This is a USDA standard, and it means probably exactly what you think it means. It means that the animal only consumes grass or forage, which is just other natural things that are in pastures, The exceptions to this is mother's milk prior to the weaning, when it's a baby. It cannot be fed grain or grain byproducts and have continuous access to pasture during growing season. The animal can receive routine mineral and vitamin supplementation. So simple as that. So again, no matter what you choose, these are what the standards are right now for those different types of foods and ingredients to keep you informed on what those labels mean. One last thing that I want to touch on today, I don't know if anyone's ever seen, I would assume most of you have, those little hearts with the check marks on them on different products. Most people see that little mark and say, again, okay, healthy choice, let's go for it. And again, the goal is to make it healthy and things like that, which is great. The American Heart Association did that. It's a good general recommendation. But I want you to be sure that you're aware of what it actually means so you can know all the details before you assume that that product is going to be better than something else. Similar to the organic labels, though, a ton goes into this, so I can't cover every single thing that qualifies for the little red heart, but I'll hit on some main points. And I do apologize for the busyness of this slide. I know there's a lot there. But as you can see, there are quite a few things to look at, including low-fat and saturated fat, which, like we've already talked about, doesn't necessarily mean it's a super healthy food, but that's still what the industry looks at right now. We'll see how that changes as the years goes on, but that's how it is right now. Low trans fat, which I am totally on board with. Trans fats are absolutely the type of fat that you need to stay away from, so that's great. Cholesterol levels need to be 20 grams or less. This can get a little tricky because certain foods like eggs have higher cholesterol, but the cholesterol in foods don't necessarily affect the cholesterol in our bodies. There's different things going on there, but we're going to have to cover that in another webinar. That's a lot. So moving on. Beneficial nutrients. Products have to have 10% of the recommended daily value of one of 6 of the following: vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, calcium, protein, or fiber. So you get a little heart if you have 10% of one of those. If it's a grain-based product, it has to be a good source of fiber, have 7 grams or less of sugar per serving if it's the good source of fiber, or 9 grams or less of serving if it's an excellent source of fiber, which means it has 20+%. Sugars from fruits don't count, again, but they just need to be disclosed that that's where those are coming from. So it's basically the added sugars that we need to keep at 7 or 9 grams or less that they're talking about. Again, I love that they have the added sugar limit, but just be aware that the total added sugar should be 25 grams for women, 37.5 grams for men. So even though these are below this limit for a serving size, you're still at a pretty big percentage of that added sugar already, right? If we're talking about 25 grams and there's something that you've already got 9 grams in one serving. So again, just be mindful of that. Again, there's a lot more criteria out there, but if you dig into the American Heart Association website, you can find all those little details on that. So a lot of information today, guys. I'll hopefully have time for a couple questions here, but let's talk about the next webinars before I wrap it up. Next month, December, change your mindset, change your health, how your thoughts impact your health. This we thought would be very important leading into the holiday seasons and towards the end of the year. Get yourself set up for a great new year. And then in January, we're going to do sleep science, how to sleep your way to better health. Sleep is the basis of our health. It's so important. So please be sure you tune in to those 2 webinars. And you can find out more on our blog, healthcheck360blog.com. And that's where you're going to watch past webinars, is on the blog. We are also on Twitter, Facebook. We have an Instagram account, or you can give us a call or shoot us an email. Phone number, email is on there as well. So thank you everyone for listening, and I will open it up for questions if anyone has any.